In the far north, where the vast Bering Sea collides with the volcanic Aleutian Island chain, a forgotten chapter of history lies submerged beneath a perpetually gray horizon. This region, battered by nature's fury, is a world of contradictions. Beautiful yet brutal, majestic yet merciless. The wind never truly rests here. It howls like a living thing across empty horizons. Waves the size of buildings rise and collapse with an almost deliberate rhythm, smashing against the black volcanic cliffs before retreating into the mist. For centuries, the ocean has kept its secrets, its depths swallowing countless ships, leaving behind only fragments of stories whispered among fishermen and historians. But among these whispered tales lies one particular enigma, a battlefield consumed by the sea, preserved beneath a shroud of darkness for over 80 years. It is a sunken graveyard from a world at war, a place where metal and memory fused under the pressure of 300 feet of icy water. Time stopped here in the final months of World War II's Northern Campaign, and the ocean became both tomb and guardian. For decades, the story of the warships and transports lost here remained buried in official reports and scattered eyewitness accounts. Their coordinates were vague, their fates uncertain. Those who sailed on them were recorded simply as missing. The ocean kept them. Now, in an era defined by technological curiosity, humanity has found a way to pierce that darkness. Off the storm-beaten shores of Attu, the westernmost island of Alaska's Aleutian chain, a team of maritime archaeologists has begun a project of extraordinary ambition. Using fleets of autonomous underwater vehicles and high-resolution sonar imaging, they have rediscovered what was once thought lost forever, an underwater battlefield frozen in time. As the robotic drones descended through the black water, their floodlights revealed shapes emerging from the abyss, twisted steel, scattered cargo, and the unmistakable outline of a ship's bow jutting from the seafloor like a ghost reaching toward the surface. The footage that followed would rewrite a small but haunting chapter of the Second World War. The story of the Kotohira Maru, the forgotten ships that accompanied her, and the brutal, frost-bitten war that unfolded in the Aleutians, the war the world forgot. To understand the full magnitude of this discovery, we must go back to 1942, to the Aleutian Islands Campaign, a conflict so remote, so overshadowed by the monumental battles in Europe and the Pacific, that even veterans called it the Forgotten War. It was June of that year. Only 6 months had passed since the attack on Pearl Harbor, a wound still raw and bleeding across the United States. While the nation rallied, the Empire of Japan launched an audacious strike that brought the global conflict directly onto American soil. Japanese forces invaded and occupied 2 small U.S. territories, the islands of Attu and Kiska, part of the windswept Aleutian chain stretching from Alaska toward Asia. It was the first foreign occupation of American land since 1812, and the shock reverberated all the way to Washington. The Japanese strategy was daring and calculated. By seizing the Aleutians, they aimed to shield their northern flank, divert American forces from the Central Pacific, and possibly threaten the U.S. mainland. To the Americans, the move felt ominous, a dagger thrust toward their northern frontier. General Billy Mitchell's earlier warning, "Whoever holds Alaska holds the world," suddenly felt prophetic. But those who fought in the Aleutians quickly realized that this was not a war of glory. It was a war of endurance, fought against an enemy far more consistent than any army, the environment itself. The islands were cursed with relentless willowaws, hurricane-force winds that could rip tents from the ground and flip aircraft like paper toys. Fog rolled in without warning, thick enough to blot out entire squadrons mid-flight. The cold was merciless, the rain constant, and the terrain a swamp of jagged rock and sucking mud. Soldiers described it as the edge of the world, where even the birds looked lost. Here, in this forsaken expanse, the U.S. Army and Navy waged a grim campaign to reclaim the territory. Pilots of the 11th Air Force flew missions in near-zero visibility, navigating only by dead reckoning and prayer. Ground troops trudged through knee-deep mud, their rifles rusting in the salty air. Men froze in their foxholes, engines seized, food froze solid before it could be cooked. The enemy was both human and elemental. The Japanese garrisons at Attu and Kiska, though isolated, were formidable. Cut off from reinforcement, they relied entirely on supply ships, the Mairus, that sailed from Japan through the Kuril Islands, braving storms, submarines, and bombers. These lifelines became the center of the Aleutian struggle, a deadly game of hide-and-seek between American patrols and Japanese convoys, in a theater of perpetual fog. For the crews of the 11th Air Force, every patrol was a test of endurance. Flights often lasted 10 or more hours, covering hundreds of miles of featureless ocean. Inside the unheated fuselage, the temperature dropped below freezing. Oxygen masks iced over. Navigators traced lines on maps that trembled in their hands. Radio communication was patchy at best. Yet despite it all, they flew, scanning the waves below for the faintest outline of a ship's wake.
To the bomber crews, victory was statistical. Tonnage sunk, convoys destroyed. To the men below, it was personal. They could hear the bombs fall. One such encounter, reconstructed from declassified reports and survivor testimony, would define the fate of the Kotohira Maru. On January 6, 1943, under a gray, turbulent sky, she sailed toward Attu's Holtz Bay. Her captain, a veteran merchantman named Kubo, believed they were close enough to safety to relax the zigzag pattern, the evasive maneuver designed to foil bombers. The fog had thickened again. Visibility was poor. But at that moment, fate intervened. Far above, an American patrol plane, a B-24 from the 404th Squadron, caught a brief glimpse through the clouds, a ship cutting through the waves where none should have been. The crew radioed the sighting. Hours later, a strike group was airborne, their bomb bays armed and ready. The hunters had found their prey. The attack unfolded in the cold light of an Aleutian morning, a morning that never quite turned bright. The sky hung low, the ocean churned violently, and the wind carried a knife's edge. For the men aboard the Kotohira Maru, the first warning came as a distant hum. It grew into a mechanical roar, echoing across the waves. Someone shouted, pointing toward the clouds. Black dots emerged, swelling rapidly as they descended through the mist. American bombers, their engines thunderous, their formation tight and purposeful. Panic spread across the deck. Orders were shouted in Japanese, half drowned by the wind. Gun crews scrambled to their positions, swinging light anti-aircraft guns toward the oncoming shapes. The ship's siren wailed, a long, mournful cry swallowed by the sea. Above, in the lead bomber, Lieutenant Jack Morrow peered through his bomb sight. Below him, the freighter appeared tiny against the endless gray expanse, but even from 10,000 feet, he could see the flashes of gunfire from her deck. His voice was calm as he called out corrections. "Left 5 degrees. Steady. Bombs away." The first wave of explosions erupted near the stern. Columns of water rose like geysers, drenching the ship. A near miss shook the hull violently. The next moments were chaos, smoke, shouting, the screech of tearing metal. Then came the fatal blow. A single 500-pound bomb struck near the bow, tearing through the deck and detonating in the forward hold. The blast ripped the steel plating apart as if it were paper. Eyewitnesses later said the bow simply disappeared, obliterated in a plume of fire and smoke. Seawater poured into the gaping wound. The Koto Hiramaru began to list sharply, her stern rising. Inside the ship, men stumbled through darkness, choking on smoke and oil fumes. Some tried to launch lifeboats, but the waves smashed them against the hull before they could touch water. Others leapt directly into the sea, a death sentence. The Bering Sea in January is not survivable. The temperature hovers just above freezing. Within minutes, muscles lock, breath fails, and the body shuts down. From the bombers above, the crew watched as the ship began to break apart. The forward section was gone. Fires flickered briefly before being extinguished by the waves. Then, in a slow, final motion, the Koto Hiramaru rolled onto her side and slipped beneath the surface. The sea swallowed her whole. Of the estimated 120 men aboard, only 2 were rescued days later by a Japanese patrol vessel. The rest were never seen again. The Americans recorded the attack as a success. Enemy freighter destroyed near Attu. For the men who flew that mission, it was just another line in a combat log. But beneath the waves, an entire world had been erased. As the bombers turned for home, the sea was already reclaiming its dead. 80 winters passed. The world changed. Empires fell. Oceans rose, and the silence above the Aleutian Trench remained unbroken. What the bombers destroyed, the sea entombed, sealing it beneath layers of silt, darkness, and myth. Then, in the summer of 2025, an autonomous deep-sea exploration program, Arctic Echoes Initiative, launched a mission to map the ocean floor between Attu and Kiska. Its goal was scientific, not historical, to chart undersea volcanic vents and survey ecological damage from Cold War debris. But history, it seemed, had been waiting. At 2:47 a.m., one of the drones, codenamed AUV-11 Nereid, detected an anomaly 300 feet down. The sonar image appeared as a long, curved silhouette beneath the sediment, too symmetrical to be natural. The operator, marine archaeologist Dr. Aiko Tanaka, stared at the monitor in disbelief. The shape was unmistakable. A ship's hull. Gasps filled the control room. After 80 decades, the sea had finally given up its secret. The footage spread rapidly through historical and maritime circles. The wreck's position matched the 1943 combat reports with eerie precision. Around the ship lay debris fields, ammunition crates, scattered rifles, porcelain china marked with the imperial crest. Some of the crew's personal effects were still visible: a boot, a rusted helmet, a tea kettle frozen in mid-pour, all fossilized in salt and sand. Dr. Tanaka described it best. It was as if time had simply stopped mid-breath. You could feel the story, the human panic, still trapped inside the silence. The discovery triggered a joint research mission between Japan's Maritime Heritage Agency and the U.S. Naval History Command. The two nations, once enemies, now partners in preservation, agreed to treat the site as a war grave, untouched and protected. But before the drones retreated, they recorded the entire wreck in 8K detail, a digital resurrection of a forgotten battlefield. What emerged from that data was extraordinary. Not just the Koto Hiramaru, but 3 other vessels within a 2-mile radius. 2 were Japanese, believed to be smaller cargo escorts, and one was unmistakably American, a B-24 Liberator lying inverted on the seabed. The same aircraft type that had sunk the freighter. For the first time, the hunters and the hunted were reunited, side by side, preserved by the same sea that had destroyed them. As the research team pieced together the digital reconstruction, a deeper realization settled in. This wasn't just wreckage, it was evidence of a forgotten war fought under impossible conditions. Historians had long argued whether the Aleutian Campaign truly mattered in the grand scheme of World War II. But seeing these relics, side by side, silent yet defiant, erased all doubt. Each rivet, each rusted weapon, was proof of human endurance in one of the harshest frontiers. The wreck scans revealed haunting details. The freighter's bridge was still intact, its compass frozen at a bearing toward Attu. The galley lay scattered with utensils, as if breakfast had been interrupted by the bombs. A single lifeboat hung half-torn from its davits, the rope still knotted by hand.
Marine biologists noted how life had claimed Death's remains. Sea anemones bloomed where gun barrels once pointed. Schools of glassfish drifted through shattered portholes. The ship had become a reef, a sanctuary forged from tragedy. A few weeks later, the Japanese government held a small ceremony aboard a research vessel above the site. Relatives of lost sailors, many hearing the ship's name for the first time in their lives, stood silently as memorial bells rang over the gray water. A Shinto priest cast white petals into the sea. No speeches were needed. The wind carried everything unspoken. Further sonar sweeps revealed that the Kotohira Maru was not alone. Across the seabed, dozens of wrecks, Japanese, American, even Soviet, dotted the ocean floor like silent witnesses to a forgotten front. Collectively, they became known as the Ghost Fleet of the Aleutians. Each vessel told a fragment of a larger story. A U.S. destroyer, the USS Abner Reed, split in two by a mine, but still upright. A Japanese patrol boat, its bow riddled with bullet holes from strafing runs. A merchant ship resting upside down like a whale carcass, its propellers gleaming faintly in the drone lights. Together, they formed an underwater museum, a frozen timeline stretching from 1942 to 1945. Historians mapped their positions and realized something stunning. The wrecks mirrored the exact routes of wartime convoys recorded in declassified Japanese naval charts. The battlefield wasn't a single site, it was an entire undersea corridor, a 200-mile graveyard running between Kiska and Attu. For decades, fishermen had told stories of iron shadows snagging their nets in that region. Some had claimed to have pulled up brass shells stamped with Japanese characters. Most were dismissed as folklore. Now the legends had names, coordinates, and faces. Dr. Tanaka's team began compiling a digital memorial titled Voices Below the Waves. Using AI-driven facial reconstruction from recovered ID photos and archives, they created lifelike portraits of some of the men who'd served on the lost ships. The result was deeply humanizing, a reminder that these weren't nameless soldiers, but fathers, brothers, and sons caught in the machinery of war. Amid the wreckage of the Kotohira Maru, one discovery stood out. A corroded metal tube found near what would have been the captain's quarters. Inside it, wrapped in layers of decayed oilcloth, divers found a single sheet of paper, miraculously preserved by the cold. It was a letter,
written in elegant Japanese script dated January 5, 1943, one day before the ship's final voyage. The handwriting belonged to Captain Kubo himself. Translated, the letter read, quote, "To my wife, Akiko. Tomorrow we sail for Atu once more. The sea has grown angry this winter. Some say the Americans are watching from above the clouds, but I trust the fog will hide us as before. Tell our son to study hard and to love the ocean but never challenge it. The sea remembers everything. If I do not return, know that I went willingly, as all sailors must, into the endless horizon." End quote. That final line, "The sea remembers everything," became the closing quote of the documentary that followed. It captured, in one sentence, the essence of what the deep-sea drones had proven true, that even in silence, history remembers. The rediscovery of the Kotohira Maru and the surrounding wrecks reignited global interest in the Aleutian campaign. For the first time, documentaries, exhibitions, and 3D simulations allowed viewers to witness the Northern Front in cinematic realism. But beyond the spectacle, the find reshaped historical understanding. It highlighted how both sides, American and Japanese, had suffered not through hatred, but through circumstance. Thousands had perished not from combat wounds, but from exposure, frostbite, and the sheer indifference of nature. Military analysts now describe the Aleutian War as a lesson in humility, proof that technology and bravery are meaningless when confronted with the raw power of the Earth itself. At the National Museum of the Pacific War, a new exhibit opened in 2026 titled The Frozen Front. Inside a dimly lit hall, visitors walk beneath a suspended 3D replica of the Kotohira Maru's hull. Beneath it, holographic projections of waves shimmer, and the voice of an elderly Japanese survivor narrates, "When I close my eyes, I still hear the wind. It never stopped. Not in 1943, not now." Across from it, the recovered flight jacket of an 11th Air Force gunner hangs in a glass case. His name, Lieutenant Jack Morrow, died a month after the attack. His plane lost to the same storm belt that had swallowed his target. Different uniforms, same graveyard. At dusk, the research team revisited the site for one final scan. The water was calm, the sky streaked with gold, a rare mercy in the Aleutians. The drone lights illuminated the Kotohira Maru once more, her name, faint but proud, on the rusted steel. The camera panned slowly across her deck, past the twisted guns and silent corridors, before stopping on the captain's wheel, still upright, encrusted with coral. A small crab crawled across it, pausing as if to listen. The ocean was utterly still. Then, faintly, through the hydrophones, the team heard it, a low, rhythmic echo. Not mechanical, not current, a sound like knocking metal carried by the deep. One of the operators whispered, half joking, half awed, "She's still sailing down there." No one replied. The screen showed the ship's silhouette fading slowly into darkness as the drone ascended. Above, the sunlight glittered like falling embers across the water. And with that, the sea closed over the past once more, keeper of stories, guardian of the forgotten. The discovery of the Kotohira Maru did not end with the last sonar ping or the ROV's final ascent. In truth, it marked the beginning of something new, a human reckoning with ghosts long left to sleep beneath the Bering Sea.
Across the Pacific, in a quiet suburb of Yokohama, a 92-year-old woman named Sato Aiko sat in front of her television, her thin hands folded in her lap. When the evening news played footage of the deep-sea drones illuminating a rust-covered hull labeled Kotohira Maru, she whispered her brother's name for the first time in decades. He had been a deckhand, barely 19, when the ship vanished in 1943. Her family never received a body, only a terse telegram that ended with 2 words: missing, presumed lost. For families like hers, the discovery was not just archaeology, it was closure. Japanese and American Veterans Associations soon began working with the National Park Service and NOAA to plan a joint memorial to honor the dead of both sides who perished in the Aleutians. Among the artifacts recovered from the seabed was a corroded steel dispatch box found lying half-buried near the ship's collapsed midsection. Inside were dozens of letters sealed in wax, their paper preserved by cold and silt. Marine historians gently unrolled them in a temperature-controlled lab. Most were addressed to families in Hokkaido and Tokyo. The handwriting, faded but legible, spoke of the same fears and longings found in any soldier's correspondence: frostbitten hands, missing comrades, and dreams of warm kitchens far away. One letter, signed by Seaman Second Class Kenji Mori, read, "If we do not return, please do not grieve too long. The sea will carry us where the wind once failed." Copies of the translations were later delivered to surviving relatives. For many, it was the first time they had read the words of men lost before they themselves were born. On the American side, similar ripples spread. In Anchorage, the son of a B-24 bombardier recognized his father's squadron markings in archival footage shown alongside the discovery. Until that moment, he had known his father only as a quiet man who never spoke of the war. Now, through declassified reports and video from the wreck, he began to understand the cost behind that silence, the blurred line between duty and regret. In a later interview, he said, "My father never said he sank a ship, he said he did his job. But when I saw those ROV lights move across that deck, I realized those weren't just enemy sailors. They were boys like him, trying to survive." For both nations, the rediscovery of the Kotohira Maru turned an obscure footnote of history into a mirror, forcing each to confront what war truly leaves behind. In the summer of 2024, 81 years after the Aleutian campaign, a small ceremony took place on the wind-scoured island of Attu. A granite monument, carved from local stone, was unveiled near the shoreline facing Holt's Bay. Inscribed in both English and Japanese were the words, "Here rest the sailors of 2 nations, united by the sea they shared and the peace they never saw." Representatives from Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force and the U.S. Navy stood side by side. A Shinto priest and a Christian chaplain offered prayers. Wreaths were cast into the surf, their petals carried out by the same cold current that once claimed Kotohira Maru. For the first time, descendants of the men who fought and died there met face to face. Many wept quietly, others stood in silence, their eyes on the horizon, where fog still rolled across the water like memory itself. Modern sonar now maps every contour of the seabed, yet the Bering Sea remains a realm of secrets. New expeditions have already detected more wrecks scattered between Attu and Kiska. Tankers, patrol craft, even aircraft resting on their bellies amid forests of kelp. Each site, when studied, reveals not only strategy and tactics, but the fingerprints of the individuals who lived and died there. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a lead marine archaeologist on the NOAA project, described it best. History used to live in books and archives. Now, it breathes through salt water. Every rivet, every teacup, every rusted wheel down there, it's a human heartbeat frozen in steel. These missions are not treasure hunts. No artifact is removed without purpose. Instead, the focus has shifted to preservation through technology, 3D modeling, virtual dives, and augmented reality exhibits that allow anyone, anywhere to explore the underwater battlefield without disturbing it. Back in Japan, the story reignited public discussion about wartime memory and reconciliation. Newspaper editorials reflected on how the discovery, led by both nations together, symbolized a quiet healing of old wounds. Television documentaries drew record audiences, especially among younger generations. At one university in Tokyo, students built a digital archive dedicated to the Kotohira Maru project, linking survivor testimonies, drone footage, and wartime diaries. In Alaska, schools added the Aleutian campaign to their history curriculum for the first time in decades. For the people of the Aleutians themselves, the Onangaks, whose villages had been destroyed or evacuated during the war, the memorial offered recognition long overdue. Their elders remembered the sounds of planes, the burning oil slicks, and the years spent as displaced civilians. Now, their oral histories were being recorded alongside the data from the seabed, uniting human memory and scientific discovery into a single narrative. 80 years after the guns fell silent, the Bering Sea continues to whisper its stories to those willing to listen. The Kotohira remains where she fell, upright, dignified, and quiet beneath 300 feet of cold water. Her decks, once alive with the noise of engines and shouted orders, now host colonies of anemones and pale crabs moving among the wreckage. Her bridge windows are shattered, yet through them light still filters, dim, blue, eternal. In the end, technology may have rediscovered the battlefield, but it is memory that redeems it. Each sonar scan, each recorded dive, and each shared story brings back a fragment of humanity lost to time. The Aleutian graveyard no longer belongs to history's shadows. It belongs to all who seek to understand not just how men fought, but how they endured, and how the sea, after all these years, still keeps their secrets.